I didn't flinch when he said it. Just sat there at the too small table, a candle burning on a cupcake I paid for myself, as my son leaned back in his chair and said, "You're just a bill we regret." No one corrected him. No one even blinked. My daughter stared at her plate. My daughter-in-law adjusted her napkin. And after a lifetime of giving without a ledger, of covering emergencies, tuition, rent, I realized the only gift I hadn't given was absence. So that night, I left them the one thing they'd never budgeted for: consequences. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Ruth's 74th birthday dinner. One sentence detonates the family's illusion of civility. The restaurant was one of those mid-tier bistros with dim lighting and wine lists laminated like menus at a chain diner. A glass wall overlooked the parking lot, where Ruth's beige sedan sat crooked between the lines. She hadn't parked straight in years, but no one ever said anything. They sat at a square table too small for 5 people. The waiter had to push it out from the wall so Ruth could squeeze in. She was wearing her best blouse, navy with little white polka dots, and a pair of clip-on earrings that had belonged to her mother. Maya had reserved the table. She'd even called ahead to make sure they brought out a cupcake with a candle, though Ruth didn't like dessert. Nathan arrived late, his phone still in his hand when he slid into his seat. His tie was slightly loosened, a faint shadow of 5 o'clock stubble on his jaw. "Sorry, traffic," he said, not looking at anyone. Ruth paid for her own meal, of course. She always did. She insisted, and no one had the spine or the guilt to argue anymore. Not since 2017. The table was quiet after the waiter took their plates. A single candle flickered on the tiny cupcake in front of Ruth. She didn't blow it out. Instead, she smiled politely and took a small sip of coffee. Heather, her daughter-in-law, tried to fill the silence. "We've been looking at refinancing again. Mortgage rates might dip next quarter." Maya nodded. "I've been meeting with a planner too. Retirement's coming up quicker than I expected." Nathan snorted, soft but pointed. "Retirement, sure. We'll all be working until we're in the ground." Heather glanced at him. Then back to Ruth. "You doing okay with expenses, Mom?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She adjusted the spoon beside her coffee cup and traced the rim of her saucer with one finger. "It's manageable," she said quietly. And then Nathan said it, like he was commenting on the weather, like it had been sitting in his throat for years, waiting for the worst possible moment to escape. "You're just a bill we regret." The words were so sharp they didn't land all at once. They hovered over the table like smoke from a kitchen fire, slow, invasive, impossible to ignore. Maya dropped her fork. The clatter seemed to echo, as if the walls of the restaurant had leaned in to listen. Heather's eyes flinched. She didn't say a word. She looked down at her water glass, fingers tightening around the stem. Nathan took a slow sip of his beer, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Ruth blinked twice. Then she smiled, a tight paper-thin expression that made her crow's feet look deeper than they were a minute ago. She didn't respond. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't cry. She picked up her coffee again, held it with both hands like it was something fragile. Outside, headlights swept across the window as a car reversed out of a spot. Inside, the candle still burned, untouched. "I think I'm ready to go," Ruth said softly, to no one in particular. She stood. No one stopped her. The check was already paid. By her. She collected her coat from the back of the chair, slipping it on with a practiced slowness. Heather stood next, fumbling with her purse, like she wanted to say something but couldn't assemble the words in time. Maya was still staring at her plate, as if the cupcake might vanish if she kept looking. Nathan didn't move. Ruth paused at the edge of the table. She looked at all of them like strangers in a hotel lobby. Then she nodded once and walked out. The door chimed behind her. The candle still burned. Maya finally whispered, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Nathan didn't look up. "She'll be fine," he muttered, with a flatness that didn't reach his eyes. Heather pulled on her coat. "That was a line you don't come back from." Nathan reached for his phone. "We'll see. Sometimes a drawer isn't just a drawer. It's a reckoning waiting to happen." The house was cold when Ruth got home. Not winter cold, but the kind that settles in when no one's spoken in hours and the rooms get too quiet. She hung her coat on the hook behind the laundry room door, towed off her flats, and walked straight to the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed low and steady. It sounded louder than usual. She poured herself half a glass of ginger ale, no ice, and sat at the table without turning on a single light. For a long time, she just sat. Then she got up and walked down the hall to her bedroom, flicked on the lamp beside the dresser, and stared at the top drawer, the one she hadn't opened in 4 years. Not since the shingles. Not since the fall that cracked her wrist and made Nathan talk to her like she was a burden disguised as a mother. She opened it. Inside, rubber-banded paperwork slouched against a forgotten checkbook. The edges were yellowing. A manila folder sat right on top. Estate, final. Written in her own handwriting, capital letters that looked bolder than she remembered. She carried it to the bed and set it down beside her. The folder felt heavier than it should, like maybe the weight was coming from inside her chest. She flipped it open. Power of attorney, health directive, will? She scanned each page slowly. Her name, her signature, each document intact, notarized, filed in triplicate. Her own life reduced to legal formality. And there it was, Nathan Wallace, sole heir. She stared at the line. It wasn't shocking. It wasn't new. But something about seeing it now felt like looking through a window into someone else's choices. There was a time it made sense. Nathan had power of attorney, handled her accounts, kept track of the taxes when she started forgetting the online passwords. Maya and Heather had careers. He had time and charm when he wanted to. But he was also the man who said what he said. Who didn't flinch after saying it. Her throat tightened. Not with anger, but something quieter, something more final. She closed the folder and placed it on the bedspread, like a finished book. Then she reached for the landline. Jonah Brooks, attorney, a voicemail began. Ruth waited for the beep. Jonah, it's Ruth Wallace. I'd like to make an appointment. Something private. No rush, but soon. Thank you. She hung up. The next morning, Terry stopped by to drop off some tea and a loaf of banana bread wrapped in wax paper. Morning, sunshine, Terry called as she stepped into the kitchen. You sleep okay? Ruth was already seated, her coffee half gone, the estate folder tucked into a tote on the floor. I slept just fine, Ruth said, which was only half a lie. Terry caught sight of her face and narrowed her eyes. All right, what happened? Ruth hesitated, then exhaled through her nose. Nathan said something, at dinner. Terry dropped the loaf on the counter with a soft thud. What now, Ruth told her. Not the whole night, not every detail, just the sentence and how no one stopped him. How no one stood up. Terry's face turned sharp. You're kidding. No. That boy needs his teeth rearranged. I'm not angry, Ruth said softly. She reached down, picked up the tote, and placed it on the table. I'm just done apologizing for existing. Terry blinked, then nodded slowly, like she didn't want to scare the moment away. What are you going to do? Ruth rested her hand on the tote. Her fingers drummed once, twice. I already started. Some visits are routine. Others shift the air, without warning, forever. It was late afternoon when Maya arrived. The kind of autumn light that casts long gold ribbons across the floorboards. Ruth had already laid out 2 mismatched teacups, her favorite shortbread tin between them. The radio murmured faintly in the background, classical, something without words. Maya stepped inside without knocking. She always had. Ruth was seated at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched low, a dish towel folded neatly in her lap. You look rested, Maya said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I am, Ruth replied. Tea? Maya nodded and hung her purse on the back of the chair. Steam curled from the pot as Ruth poured. Neither spoke for a moment. The weight of the birthday dinner still hung between them, not sharp anymore, but dense and low, like the sky before a storm breaks. I keep thinking about what he said, Maya finally whispered. Stirring her cup without taking a sip, Ruth didn't look up. Of course you do. I mean, I knew he was capable of being cutting, Maya said carefully. But that was different. That wasn't frustration. That was intentional. Ruth folded the dish towel again, slower this time. Her voice was calm when she answered. Yes, Maya studied her. Do you believe him? That made Ruth pause. She looked out the window, where the wind bent the last of the maple leaves into little amber flutters. No, she said at last. But I believe he meant it. Maya blinked. The admission sank in deeper than she expected. Ruth finally met her daughter's eyes. And that's the part that matters. They sat in silence again. No one touched the shortbread. I need to ask you something, Maya said. Voice low, Ruth waited. Are you changing the will? Ruth didn't answer right away. She took a sip of her tea, then stood and crossed the room to the old china cabinet. Her movement was slow but steady, measured like someone stepping through a place of memory. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. She brought it back and set it gently in front of Maya. What's this? Ruth unwrapped it herself. Inside was a thick, worn cookbook, edges frayed, pages marked with decades of fingerprints and flour smudges. A few recipes were written in looping cursive, others on slips of paper tucked between the pages. Maya smiled before she could stop herself. Grandma's, Ruth nodded. You used to love helping her roll out the sugar cookies. I remember the blue apron, Maya said, flipping through the pages. And the burnt cornbread that everyone pretended wasn't burnt. She always said, crunch just means character, Ruth said. And for the first time in days, her eyes softened. They laughed. Not loud, not long. But it was real. Maya ran her hand over the front cover. This means a lot. It should, Ruth said. There's more of our family in that book than in any photo album. Maya closed it gently, her thumb lingering on the spine. I didn't come for anything, she said. I just didn't want you sitting here thinking no one noticed. Ruth reached across the table and touched her daughter's wrist. I know who notices. The timer on the oven went off for no reason. They both jumped, then chuckled again. It hadn't been set, just the house settling, or maybe something older reminding them it was still there. Maya stood reluctantly. I should get going. You okay if I take this? Ruth nodded once. As Maya wrapped the book back in cloth, she glanced again at the tote on the floor, same one Ruth had shown Terry. She didn't ask what was in it, but as she walked out the front door, Ruth called after her. Maya? Yeah? Ruth's voice was quiet, but unmistakably clear. Whatever happens next, just remember who sat at my table. It wasn't just paper, it was permission to choose peace over legacy. The law office smelled like lemon polish and old ambition. Brass nameplates lined the hallway, each one slightly tarnished at the edges, like no one dared admit time was passing here too. Jonah Brooks greeted her in the waiting room with a soft smile and a firm handshake. Ruth, he said. Not lawyer formal, but friend familiar. She'd known him since the settlement of Harold's estate. Back then, she'd barely held herself together long enough to sign the papers. Now, nearly a decade later, she walked in with steady legs and a canvas tote, holding the weight of something far heavier than grief. They sat in his office beneath a wall of framed degrees and sports memorabilia. University of Michigan, mid-'80s Rose Bowl ticket. A signed baseball she suspected he couldn't name the origin of if pressed. He offered coffee. She declined. Ready, he asked. Ruth pulled the folder from her bag and laid it on the desk. More than I expected. Jonah flipped through the draft copy first, marking places for signatures, and cleared his throat. The changes are all in here, per your notes. She nodded once. Nathan's name has been removed, Jonah continued. Maya is now listed as primary heir, contingent upon completion of either an accredited graduate degree or 2 years of documented public service work. Ruth's jaw tightened briefly, but she said nothing. There's also the new charitable trust, he added, sliding a separate file across to her. The Harold Wallace Nursing Fund, established to provide tuition support for students at the community college. You noted he always wanted to go into medicine? He got drafted instead, Ruth said, voice low. Then the kids came, and then the bills. Jonah nodded, understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He turned one final page. And this clause, here at the end, he said, tapping it lightly, states, any attempt to contest this shall be interpreted as a voluntary forfeiture of all inheritance rights. No contest, no confusion. Ruth looked at the sentence, let her eyes stay on it. She didn't blink. It's fair, she said quietly. Jonah sat back in his chair. This isn't revenge, Ruth. This is clarity. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. A knock came at the door, 2 short raps, then one longer. Jonah stood to open it. Terry stepped in, dressed like she was headed to Sunday church. Navy skirt, crisp blouse, a brooch Ruth hadn't seen her wear in years. Her eyes scanned the room and settled proudly on Ruth. Witness ready, she said with a little wink. Jonah chuckled. Then let's make it official. He handed Ruth a pen, sleek silver, heavy like a tool, not a toy. She signed in silence, page after page, steady hand, no hesitation. The kind of confidence born not from anger, but from knowing she would never again hand over power in exchange for peace. Terry signed next, then Jonah. When the final signature dried, Jonah slid the documents into a crisp navy folder and fastened it shut. Copies will go out this week, he said. You can store the originals in your safe, or I can hold them here. Ruth stood slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from her slacks. Hold them. It's better that way. Terry took her arm, but not like she was helping, more like she was anchoring her. As they reached the lobby, Jonah stopped them with one final question. Do you want them to know now, or find out later? Ruth adjusted her scarf, calm as the sea before a storm. Let the truth arrive the way they let that sentence arrive. Jonah raised an eyebrow. In silence, she said. And too late. Sometimes guilt knocks, but truth always opens the door. Ruth was trimming the brown edges off a bouquet of grocery store tulips when the doorbell rang. No text, no warning. Just the sharp ding of someone trying to unbury something that had stayed quiet too long. When she opened the door, Heather stood there, holding a small paper bag like it was a peace offering or an apology. Probably both. I brought muffins, Heather said, her voice gentler than Ruth remembered it being. Ruth held the door open without a word. Heather stepped inside, glancing around like she wasn't sure she was still welcome. In the kitchen, Ruth poured tea. She didn't ask what kind. Heather sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. I should have said something that night, she said, eyes down, at the restaurant. Ruth set a mug in front of her. Silence speaks too. Heather blinked, the words landing harder than expected. I was shocked. That's not an excuse, but he doesn't usually go that far. At least not in front of other people. Ruth raised an eyebrow slightly. But he does go that far. Heather looked up, then away. When the pressure gets bad, yeah, he snaps. Ruth didn't move. And it's bad now, Heather nodded, hesitating. He's drowning, Ruth. I'm not defending him, but the debt, the stress, it's worse than I knew. He hasn't told the girls, won't answer calls from the credit union. I found an envelope from the IRS stuffed in his desk drawer. You're telling me this, why? Ruth asked, not cruelly, but clearly. Heather swallowed. Because I think he said what he said out of fear, out of desperation. Ruth's voice was quiet. Then he should have asked for help, not hurled hurt. Heather didn't answer. Her fingers curled tighter around the paper bag. I know he's proud, she said finally, and angry at himself, but he shouldn't have taken it out on you, and I'm sorry I let him. They sat in the silence that followed. A clock ticked softly in the hallway. The scent of the tulips had faded, but Ruth didn't throw them out, not yet. I meant what I said to Maya, Heather added. That night, that there are lines you don't come back from. Ruth looked at her. Do you think this is one of them? I don't know, Heather admitted. But if it is, I don't want to be standing on the wrong side of it. Ruth studied her face for a long moment. The woman who had married into her family, bore its name, raised her grandchildren. Quiet, capable, tactful to a fault, and finally cracking under the weight of too much politeness and not enough truth. You ever think about leaving? Ruth asked softly. Heather exhaled hard. Not until recently. That was answer enough. Ruth reached across the table, not to comfort, but to offer stillness. Heather's eyes welled, but she blinked them dry before they could fall. When she stood to leave, she left the muffins behind. At the door, she turned back. Thank you for listening, even if you didn't have to. I didn't, Ruth agreed, but I'm still me. Heather gave a small, sad smile and walked to her car. Ruth watched from the doorway until she turned the corner and disappeared. She was still standing there when Maya's car pulled into the drive. Her daughter stepped out, took one look at Ruth's face, and immediately understood. She came? Ruth nodded. Maya looked down the street, as if she might still see Heather in the distance. She say what I think she said? More, probably, Ruth replied. Maya reached for the doorknob, pausing before stepping in. I know this can't be easy, she said, voice quiet. But I'm proud of you for giving her a chance, even when she didn't deserve one. Ruth glanced at the table behind her, the untouched tea, the paper bag, the bruised silence. I didn't give her a chance, Ruth said. I gave her the truth. When power shifts, the first thing to ring is the phone. The call came just after 10 on a Wednesday. Ruth had just finished watering the ferns and was setting the kettle on when the phone buzzed. Not the landline, but the old cell she kept more for emergencies than anything else. The screen lit up with his name. She didn't let it ring twice. Nathan. His voice came fast, almost friendly. Mom, look, I don't want this to get dramatic. Let's just be rational. We're family. Ruth paused, letting the silence breathe between them. Family, she repeated. That word doesn't mean what you think it does. He chuckled, thin and sharp. Come on, everyone was tense that night. I was making a joke, obviously. You know me. I do, she said flatly. Nathan's tone tightened. All right, so maybe it landed wrong. But you're seriously going to rewrite everything because I had a bad night. She sat down at the kitchen table, one hand on the ceramic mug, still warm from rinsing, the other resting calmly in her lap. This isn't about one night, she said. It's about a pattern. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, Nathan, she said, voice calm and exact. You're just not used to being held accountable. He exhaled hard. Jesus, Mom. You said I was a bill you regret. That doesn't come out of nowhere. I was frustrated, he snapped. I've had a lot on my plate. The girls, the business. You don't know what it's like right now. You're right, Ruth said. I don't know, because you never asked me for help. You just punished me for existing. The line went quiet. Static in the background, a soft tapping, maybe his ring on a desk, maybe a restless finger on a keyboard. You've always taken things too personally, he said finally. I tell the truth and you act like I've stabbed you. No, Ruth said, calm as a surgeon. You've confused cruelty with candor. He was quiet again. Then, so this is about the will. It's about dignity, she replied. Mine, and yours, if you choose to find some. Nathan's breath came in slow, through his nose. So that's it? You're cutting me out. You did that yourself, she said. Click. He didn't say goodbye. Just ended the call like it was a negotiation gone cold. She set the phone down gently, not surprised. Not shaken. Just settled. The way something heavy finally stops shifting and comes to rest. By noon, Jonah had already responded to her email. Subject, follow-up documentation. Ruth, per your request, I've attached a formal summary of the updated estate documents, including revocation of previous terms and restatement of beneficiary designations. Should further legal protection be necessary, I can draft a pre-litigation advisement and provide a copy for all named parties. We'll stay ahead of this. Jonah. She printed it. 2 copies, one for her drawer, one for the safe. Ruth tucked the pages into a manila envelope and slipped them beside her insurance papers. Everything fit. Everything belonged. She stood in the hallway for a moment, looking toward the living room where the afternoon sun had started to slide across the carpet. Like a clock no one could turn back. The phone hadn't rung again. Not yet. She didn't expect it would. Sometimes the loudest attacks arrive without a name attached, but everyone knows who it's about. Ruth saw it first while scrolling through Facebook at the kitchen table, waiting for the kettle to boil. Her feed was mostly harmless. Old neighbors posting dog pictures, church potlucks, the occasional local obituary. But then there it was, Nathan's name, his profile picture. A stiff headshot from 5 years ago, still wearing the same tired suit and smile. The post read, "Funny how people forget who helped them when it counted. Amazing how fast gratitude turns into a pen and a lawyer. But that's okay. Truth always floats." Family first. But not always. It wasn't tagged. No names, no specifics, but it didn't need them. The comments were polite at first. Doug S. Hope you're okay, man. Let me know if you want to grab lunch. Lisa G. Ugh, I know this feeling. Stay strong. Maya Wallace. Some truths float. Others are buried because no one wants to deal with what they really are. Ruth blinked, read Maya's comment twice, then once more, short, precise, just like her. She didn't react. She just closed the app, stood up, and poured hot water over her teabag. By noon, the doorbell rang. Terry, holding a manila folder and looking like she'd just run 3 errands and defused a bomb. Have you seen it? She asked, stepping inside without waiting. I have. I printed it. Screenshotted the comments too. She held up the folder. We're adding it to the estate binder, in case this turns ugly. Ruth took the folder, set it beside her stack of mail. It already turned. He just hasn't noticed. Terry exhaled through her nose, pacing toward the kitchen window. What a coward's move, posting on Facebook instead of saying it to your face. That's all he has left, Ruth said, sipping her tea. Ambiguity. Terry shook her head, furious. You want me to comment? I'll comment. I'll tag him. I'll say it out loud. No, Ruth said simply. Don't feed the fire. Just write it down. Terry opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jonah? I already emailed him. Later that afternoon, Jonah called. Keep everything, he said. Even screenshots. Date stamped, ideally. It's already printed, Ruth replied. I don't think he's smart enough to start a legal mess, Jonah said. But if he tries, we're ready. Ruth didn't respond. She looked out the window at the clinic flyer pinned to her corkboard. It had been there since spring. Anything else? She asked. Jonah paused. You okay? I'm fine. She ended the call. No goodbye needed. That evening, Ruth stood at her kitchen counter, filling out the online volunteer form for the neighborhood health clinic. She entered her name, her credentials, outdated but still valid, and checked a box that read, interested in patient intake or admin support. The final question asked, why do you want to volunteer here? She typed slowly. Because showing up for people is not the same as being seen. One requires effort. The other just requires proximity. She hit submit. Outside, the wind picked up. The tulips on her table were finally done, sagging in the vase like tired dancers after a long recital. She plucked them out one by one, gently, and dropped them into the compost bin. The vase she washed by hand. Then she set it on the windowsill, empty, but clean. Some fights aren't won by shouting. They're won by signing your name where it matters. The letter arrived in a thin white envelope, postmarked from downtown. Ruth recognized Jonah's handwriting before she even opened it. Inside was a single page, official, stamped, precise. Notice of petition for review of testamentary competence. Filed by Nathan Wallace, via counsel. Ruth read the line twice. It didn't sting, it just confirmed what she'd already known. When people run out of decency, they reach for paperwork. She called Jonah the next morning. He wasn't surprised. He's alleging diminished capacity, he said. Claims the will changes were made under confusion or coercion. Ruth let the silence stretch long enough for the truth to echo. And he thinks that will work? Not once we're done. 3 days later, Ruth sat in a crisp, sunlit exam room at the neurology clinic. The faint smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee from the hallway cart. A digital clock blinked 9:02 a.m. Dr. Emmett Klein, gray-bearded, soft-spoken, reviewed her chart. You requested this voluntarily? Ruth nodded. I prefer to save everyone the trouble. He smiled. Fair enough. Let's get started. The tests were tedious. Memory recall, number sequences, drawing intersecting pentagons. She answered each one with the kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of balancing checkbooks and reading people's faces. When he asked her to name all the U.S. presidents she could remember, she stopped at Reagan and said, After that, the memory gets unpleasant. He laughed, writing a note. You're sharper than my interns. I imagine that's not a high bar, Ruth said, lips twitching. An hour later, he closed the file and looked her squarely in the eye. You're in excellent cognitive health, Mrs. Wallace. Better than most of my patients 20 years younger. Please put that in writing, she said. I already did. Jonah filed the results with the county clerk 2 days later, attached to a motion titled Voluntary Verification of Capacity. By the end of the week, the ripple reached Nathan's lawyer, a young associate from a second-rate firm who, according to Jonah, had the enthusiasm of a golden retriever and the judgment of a stapler. Within 6 days, the firm filed a motion to withdraw the case, citing miscommunication with client. Translation: Nathan had overplayed his hand. Judge Crane issued the closing note the following morning. It was only 2 sentences long, typed on official stationery. The court finds the petition baseless and without merit. Future filings of this nature will be considered an abuse of judicial process and waste of court time. Jonah scanned it and emailed her with a short subject line. Case closed. Ruth printed that one too, added it to her folder, right beside the scholarship paperwork, the clinic volunteer form, and the stack of donation receipts for the Harold Wallace Nursing Fund. No victory dance, no phone calls, just quiet order. That evening, she sat at her kitchen desk and wrote one more check, modest but meaningful, to the scholarship account. The memo line read, "In honor of integrity." She folded it neatly into an envelope and sealed it before picking up her pen again. This time, she addressed it to no one, a blank envelope, no stamp. She placed it on top of the pile, her own private note to time. The phone buzzed once across the counter. A text from Maya. "He's gone quiet. Guess he finally got the message." Ruth typed back, "Quiet is fine. I prefer silence." She set the phone aside, walked to the window, and watched the dusk settle over the neighborhood. Porch lights flicking on one by one, the hum of distant traffic, the life that continues after noise dies. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel heavy. It just felt hers again. When you've lived long enough unseen, standing up doesn't require a spotlight, just purpose. The auditorium was small, tucked inside the community college's health sciences building. White walls, humming lights, and the smell of fresh carpet and caffeine from the vending machines down the hall. Ruth waited behind the curtain, one hand resting lightly on the podium edge, the other holding a simple note card with no speech, just bullet points. Moments she wanted to remember, not recite. A student volunteer in blue scrubs peeked in. "They're ready when you are, Mrs. Wallace." She stepped onto the stage without ceremony. The room wasn't full, maybe 40 people, but all of them wore scrubs, or carried notebooks, or sat with the posture of people preparing for a life of care. She stood behind the podium and adjusted the mic. "My name is Ruth Wallace," she began, her voice steady but not loud. "I worked as a nurse for 27 years, 10 of them in trauma, 15 in geriatrics. The rest wherever they needed hands." She paused. No notes, just memory. "I'm here because legacy is louder than money, and labor, real labor, is the currency most people never get paid back in." There was a hush, not of disinterest, but of attention. "I'm not here to name names or blame anyone, but I want to say something I didn't say for a long time. Care doesn't stop at the hospital doors, and giving doesn't always come back to you in kind. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all." A few pens stopped moving. Some stayed frozen in midair. "I spent years thinking sacrifice was silent, that the right thing was to do my part and shrink when thanked. But shrinking doesn't protect you. It just makes it easier for people to forget you were standing there." She paused again, letting that land. Maya sat in the back row, coat folded in her lap, mascara trailing just slightly at the corner of her right eye. She didn't wipe it away. She just kept looking forward, the way you do when you're finally seeing the whole picture and realizing it was never blurry, just cropped too small. Ruth went on, softer now. "If you choose this work, I hope you know it's holy, but don't let anyone turn your labor into debt, or your value into a line item." The silence after that was longer. "Reverent." She nodded once. "That's all." As she stepped away, someone started clapping, then another, then the room. Not a standing ovation, but not polite either. It was the kind of applause that came with understanding. She walked off stage with no fanfare, just a slow exhale, and a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying finally eased. The next morning, Maya brought over the paper. "I didn't know they sent a reporter," she said, handing Ruth the folded section. Ruth glanced down, bottom of the local column. Her value was never a bill, by Lauren Medina. The piece was brief but clear, no family names, no gossip. Just the image of a retired nurse who spoke like a woman with nothing to prove and no time left to pretend she hadn't earned the right to say what mattered. Ruth read it once, then again. She didn't smile wide, just enough to tighten her cheeks. Then she folded the paper in quarters and slipped it under a magnet on the fridge. Maya stood behind her, arms crossed lightly, eyes glassy. "You didn't have to say any of that," she said. "I know," Ruth replied, "but I wanted to." That night, when the house was quiet and the windows were dark, Ruth opened the small wooden box tucked in the back of her closet. Inside was a letter, yellowed, carefully refolded 100 times. Addressed in Harold's handwriting. March 8, 1981. To Ruth, if I go before you. She sat on the edge of the bed, reading slowly. The words were plain, a little clumsy, but true. He had written about how sorry he was to always make her do the math, how proud he was of the way she stitched broken things, bodies, homes, time, and how if anyone ever questioned her worth, they didn't know how to add. Her hand rested flat across the paper when she finished. She didn't cry, she just whispered, "You remembered." Some confrontations don't need words, just a hallway, a pause, and the choice not to flinch. The event was a scholarship fundraiser, casual, no press, mostly alumni and community donors sipping weak punch and flipping through pamphlets. Ruth hadn't planned on staying long. She wore a navy cardigan, the good one with the stitched cuffs, and her hair pinned up like she used to for hospital board meetings. She'd just finished speaking with a second-year student when she turned toward the exit and saw him. Nathan, standing near the back, just inside the door. Alone, no Heather, no girls, just him. He was thinner than she remembered. Not sickly, but worn. The kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad year, but from carrying the wrong things too long. They locked eyes. He didn't move, neither did she. The air between them was thick with all the things that had already been said, and the things that would never be. She kept her spine straight, chin level. Her mouth didn't soften. His jaw twitched once, then stilled. He didn't wave, she didn't nod. 10 seconds passed. Then he turned and walked out the door without a word. Ruth exhaled slowly, her hands steady at her sides. Maya appeared a moment later, holding a small cup of sparkling cider and a brow furrowed halfway between worry and fury. "I saw him," she said quietly. "I did too," Ruth replied. "You okay?" "I am." They didn't speak of him again that evening. Outside, the air was brisk. The fundraiser had wrapped just as the sun dipped low, brushing the buildings with honey and shadow. Maya unlocked the passenger door for her mother, then circled around to the driver's seat. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the kind that came from full hearts, not empty words. Ruth looked out the window, watching autumn leaves swirl past the curb like they were trying to dance their way into winter. "Sometimes absence is a full sentence," she said. Maya glanced over. "You're not wrong." Ruth turned her head, just enough to see her daughter's profile, strong jaw, the faintest dimple near the temple, Harold's eyes. "Turn left here," Maya blinked. "Why? The freeway's the other way." "Just do it." They curved off onto a quieter street, small businesses with closed signs in the windows, a gas station, an old barber shop. Then around the next corner, it came into view, Dairy Dock. The neon sign buzzed faintly. The inside lights were still on. 2 teens leaned on the counter, half bored and wiping it down like they were counting minutes. "No way," Maya said, slowing the car. "Yes way." "You haven't been here in 24 years, Ruth said. "You wore your overalls and got chocolate on your knees." Maya laughed. "And you made me promise not to tell your nurse friends you ordered 2 scoops with sprinkles." It was a rough week. Maya pulled into the empty lot. "What's the occasion now?" "Victory," Ruth said, calm and without grandeur. "And peace." They sat on the hood of the car, each with a cone in hand. Maya's was still chocolate, no sprinkles. Ruth got pistachio, too cold for it, but it didn't matter. They didn't talk much, just licked their cones and watched the sky deepen from gold to slate. When they finished, Ruth crumpled her napkin and leaned back on her hands. "I thought seeing him would hurt more," she said. "But it didn't." Maya didn't reply. She just rested her head gently on her mother's shoulder. Behind them, the Dairy Dock lights flickered once and went out. Even strong hearts have limits, especially the ones that carried too much, too long. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Ruth had just finished folding towels when a dull ache bloomed behind her breastbone, slow at first, then tight enough to freeze her mid-step. No collapse, no drama. Just a long moment of stillness with her hand pressed to the wall, breathing like someone who didn't want to scare the house. She dialed 911 herself. Clear voice, no panic. At the hospital, the machines chirped softly, politely, like they were just there to keep her company. The doctor called it a minor cardiac event, the medical equivalent of a yellow light. You caught it early, he said, but your heart's asking you to slow down, just a little. Ruth didn't argue, not this time. Maya was there within the hour, coat half-zipped and hair slightly damp from whatever errand she'd dropped. She took Ruth's hand and didn't let go. Terry came by later that afternoon, bringing socks with little rubber grips on the bottom, a deck of cards, and a list of questions only best friends dare to ask. Are they feeding you garbage? Yes. Want me to sneak you in a biscuit? Yes. Want me to sneak you in bourbon? Maybe. They laughed like it was medicine. By the third day, Ruth was sitting up in the recliner by the window, wearing her own sweater and sipping coffee that Terry had snuck in through a travel mug. Her vitals were steady, her spirit stubborn as ever. That afternoon, the nurse walked in with the phone. There's a call for you, said it's urgent. Woman named Heather? Ruth took the receiver, her face unreadable. Thank you. There was a pause on the other end. Then, Ruth? I just heard. Maya wouldn't let me visit. I get it, but I had to call. Please, I need to see you. Just me. No Nathan. No explanations. I need to say something, and I don't want to say it into a phone. Ruth didn't speak for a while. Just watched the birds pecking along the concrete ledge outside her window. Then she said 3 words. Come at 6. Heather arrived quietly, wearing jeans and a sweater too warm for the room, like she didn't know where she'd be sitting or how long she might stay. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were red before she even walked through the door. Ruth didn't rise. She didn't need to. Heather stood at the edge of the bed, clutching her purse like it might hold the right words. Then she sat. And broke. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice wrecked. I should have done more. I should have spoken up. I should have told him to stop years ago. We failed you. Ruth watched her cry without interruption, not cold, just still. I can't fix what happened, Heather went on, but I see it now, all of it. How we let you carry everything and then turned our backs when you stopped making it look easy. She took a trembling breath. You deserved better. Ruth looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. The IV line tugged gently at her wrist when she moved. We all failed each other, she said softly, but the real shame would be letting it trickle down. Heather blinked, unsure. To Maya, Ruth clarified. And the girls. That's where it stops. If we can't clean up the past, we sure as hell better not dirty the future. Heather nodded, shoulders shaking. Ruth reached for a tissue box on the tray and passed it over. She didn't offer comfort. She offered permission to feel it, to face it, to try again. There are things you only say once, and only on paper. The hospital discharge papers sat on the corner of Ruth's kitchen table, rubber-banded and slanted beside a fresh stack of mail. She ignored them. Instead, she opened the center drawer where the stationery lived. Heavy ivory paper, single-lined, the kind that didn't bend when you held it in your hand. She pulled one sheet, then another, just in case. A pen followed, a real one, black-inked and uncapped with care. She stared at the blank page for a moment before beginning. Nathan, I'm writing this once. Not to ask, not to plead, to close. I loved you enough to raise you through grief. I loved you enough to forgive your distance, your moods, your quick exits, your long silences. I loved you enough to step away when love wasn't safe anymore. You called me a bill. I want to correct the math. $1,460 for undergrad. $3,000 when your first car blew its engine. $800 when your second car got towed in Illinois. $6,250 to cover the deposit when your business nearly folded. $400 for the emergency room when Lily broke her arm. $2,900 in rent checks, slipped quietly under your doormat during your tight month. I never kept score, but I did keep records. She paused, lifting the pen for a second, You weren't a bill, but I was never your balance sheet. When I changed my will, it wasn't punishment. It was peace. Peace for me, clarity for Maya, direction for the legacy your father and I tried to build with clean hands. You are still my son. That doesn't change. But I won't fund contempt. I won't enable what I wouldn't have tolerated from a stranger. May you find your peace outside of mine. And when the time comes, please know, do not contest this. The price is already paid. Ruth. She let the pen rest across the bottom margin of the page, then reread it. Not for spelling, not for effect, just for tone. It felt right. She folded the letter once, then again, slipped it into an envelope and sealed it with the side of her hand, the way she used to seal field trip forms and condolence notes, quietly but firmly, no return address, just his name, Nathan Wallace, handwritten in her clearest cursive. She placed the envelope on top of her outgoing mail stack and pressed a small ceramic paperweight over it, a lighthouse Harold had bought for her once at a roadside market. She stared at it for a while, the chipped paint at the base, the tiny brush strokes of blue glass meant to be waves. Behind her, the house ticked softly. The refrigerator hummed. Wind pressed gently against the windows, but no leaves moved now. Autumn was almost over. She walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, and drank the whole thing in one long, steady breath. Then she reached for the manila file she'd labeled Final Dispatches, estate summary, power of attorney forms, obituary draft. The letter wasn't going in there. It was done, not for record, not for court, just for her. The doorbell rang, not urgent, not expected. Ruth set down her glass and walked to the entryway, slow but steady. She opened the door and froze. Some truths aren't delivered in courtrooms. They're handed over in living rooms, in daylight, with no room left to lie. The living room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of a paper being adjusted or a throat being cleared. The curtains were drawn open, letting late autumn light spill across the hardwood floor like something uninvited but gentle. Jonah stood at the front of the room, a leather portfolio in his hands. He wore no tie, just a gray sweater and a solemn calm that made the walls feel closer. Maya sat on the arm of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. Terry leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed tightly, watching the doorway like it might break open. Heather was already there, seated in the far corner, hair pulled back, face pale but composed. The only empty chair was the one near the entrance, the one everyone pretended wasn't waiting for someone. And then the door creaked open. Nathan stepped in, slow, reluctant, sunglasses on indoors, a wool coat that hadn't been brushed in weeks. He nodded once to the room, not making eye contact with anyone, and took the empty chair without removing his glasses. Jonah didn't comment. He opened the folder and began to read. Pursuant to the last will and testament of Ruth Wallace, dated and notarized on May the 2nd of this year, I have been asked to read the following designations aloud, in the presence of immediate family and chosen witnesses. Maya didn't blink. Heather stared down at the floor. The property located at 817 Eastwood Drive, including all physical contents not otherwise claimed, is to be transferred in full to Maya Wallace. Jonah glanced up briefly, but Maya said nothing. Additionally, the financial accounts held under the Harold and Ruth Wallace Trust are to be dispersed to Maya Wallace, contingent on continued eligibility per Clause 3A, completion of graduate studies or equivalent public service, both of which have now been fulfilled. Nathan shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped once on the armrest. Still no one looked at him. Jonah continued. An annual grant of $5,000 shall be awarded each year through the Harold Wallace Nursing Fund, to be managed by a third-party educational foundation. The fund will remain active for a minimum of 20 years. He closed the main section of the will, lifted a separate envelope from the folder, and held it delicately between thumb and forefinger. There is one final item, this letter, delivered to me personally by Ruth Wallace for distribution at the reading. It is addressed solely to Mr. Nathan Wallace. He walked across the room and handed it to Nathan. No one spoke. No one leaned forward, not even Maya. Nathan looked down at the envelope. He didn't open it. He stood, the sunglasses still on, the coat still closed. He looked toward Jonah, then to Maya, and lastly to the framed photo of Ruth on the mantel, smiling in a garden. Her hair pulled back, wearing the same polka dot blouse from the birthday dinner that had started the unraveling. Without a word, he turned and walked out. The door shut behind him. Heather didn't follow. Jonah returned to the center of the room, clearing his throat. "There's one final paragraph," he said, "which Ruth asked me to read regardless of attendance." He unfolded a page from the folder. "To those gathered today, you've witnessed the final record, but not the final love. Legacy isn't about fairness. It's about truth. What you saw in me, I hope you carry forward. What you failed to see, I hope you now remember. Ruth Wallace." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Maya stood, her shoulders straighter than they'd ever been. "Let's make lunch," she said to Terry, voice soft but rooted. Jonah closed the folder. Heather wiped one tear, quietly. Outside, the crunch of gravel signaled a car reversing down the driveway, fading, not fast. And on the floor beside Nathan's chair, the envelope remained unopened. Sometimes the will isn't what's written. It's what survives in the lives it changes. The first tuition payment came through in early August. Maya opened the email while sitting at Ruth's old desk, where the lamp buzzed gently and the drawers still held ribbon spools and recipe clippings. The subject line read simply, "Wallace Trust, Semester 1, Disbursement Confirmed." She stared at it for a few seconds longer than necessary. Not because she didn't understand it, but because the number on the screen was exactly the cost of her classes. No surplus, no flourish, just enough, as Ruth would have wanted. She leaned back in the chair and let herself smile. Small, earned. By November, 10 students had received partial tuition grants from the Harold Wallace Nursing Fund. Jonah sent Maya the summary. She read it twice, lips pressed tight. 8 of the recipients were first-generation students. 2 were returning adults, aged 35 and 41. 1 was a single father. Another had recently aged out of the foster system. Maya printed the names and pinned them to a corkboard beside the fridge. She didn't know them personally, but somehow she knew them. Ruth would have known them too. Nathan never contested the will. He never opened the letter either, not that anyone knew for sure. The envelope stayed in Jonah's file for 6 months, untouched, until Jonah mailed it to Nathan's last known address, with a certified signature card and no cover note. The signature came back, but no response ever did. The first card arrived in December, a plain winter landscape, no message inside beyond a simple handwritten line. "Wishing you a warm season. H." No return address. Maya stood in the entryway, card in one hand, envelope in the other. She didn't need a signature. The capital H curved the same way every time Heather wrote grocery lists on the family whiteboard years ago. Still, Maya turned the card over, half expecting something more to appear. Nothing did. It kept happening. Spring, summer. One in July with a painted daisy on the front. One in September with a gold foil leaf and no words inside at all. She saved everyone, filed under survival attempts. Terry came over more often now, showing up without knocking and bringing baked goods no one asked for. "I made cinnamon rolls." "It's Tuesday." "Exactly." She took to calling herself your official second grandma, even though Maya was 35 and clearly not looking for a replacement. Still, she welcomed it. Terry remembered birthdays, bad moods, and what kind of soup Ruth hated. She told stories Maya had never heard and left space for ones Maya hadn't found the words for yet. One Sunday, Terry helped Maya replant the garden bed along the fence. "You think she'd want snapdragons?" Maya asked. "No," Terry said, "but she'd let you plant them anyway." They laughed quietly and kept digging. Jonah called in early spring, not with news, with a request. "I've been asked to present a legal ethics case study at a conference in D.C., he said. "I want to use Ruth's estate, with your permission." Maya hesitated. "All of it?" "Names removed, details preserved. It's the cleanest file I've ever managed. Boundary, logic, moral clarity, no rage, just reason." Maya thought about the letter, the will, the line Ruth had drawn so clearly no one could walk past it without noticing. She'd be flattered, Maya said, and probably a little annoyed that she became a case study. Jonah laughed. That sounds about right. That night, Maya stood in the doorway of Ruth's bedroom. She hadn't moved anything yet. The bed was still made, the books still stacked in the order Ruth had read them last. She sat down at the edge of the bed and ran her hand along the quilt. Then she whispered, "You were never just the end of something." And for the first time since the funeral, she let herself cry. Revenge wasn't the ending. It was just the clarity Ruth needed to build the life she meant to leave behind. The house settled into its second life without Ruth, like it had been waiting for the silence to take on new meaning. Maya kept the blinds open in the kitchen. The coffee canister stayed full. The garden along the back fence, once ignored for whole seasons, bloomed in quiet, forgiving color. It no longer felt like a place someone left. It felt like a place someone had prepared. Maya found a rhythm. Study in the mornings, clinic hours in the afternoons, laundry folded while the radio played something low and scratchy in the evenings. The fridge had fewer labels now, but the light always worked when you opened the door. Outside the neighborhood clinic, a small bench sat beneath the old oak tree, just left of the entrance. Its brass plaque read, "In honor of Ruth Wallace, RN, Mother, Mentor, and Force." The wood warmed in the sun. Patients sat there to tie shoes or breathe deep before appointments. New interns sometimes sat with their backs hunched, reviewing notes under stress. No one ever said much about the name, but someone always cleared off the snow in winter. Someone always left flowers in May. Every fall, in a narrow conference room on the second floor of the state law building, Jonah Brooks stood before a dozen wide-eyed legal interns and clicked to slide 7 of his presentation on ethics and the unshakable will. He told Ruth's story not with sentiment, but structure. Her preparation, her foresight, the precision of her voice. She didn't write to win, he'd say. She wrote to clarify. A few interns always asked if she was real. He'd smile. Real enough to leave a ripple in every courtroom I've walked into since. Terry still came by every week. She didn't ring the bell anymore. She watered the porch plants, changed out the wreath on the front door, kept the hummingbird feeder clean and full. "This isn't grief," she said once, placing a pot of rosemary near the steps. "This is maintenance." Sometimes Maya joined her, sometimes she didn't. Either way, the house never felt neglected, just steady. By the second year, Nathan had moved to another state. Heather didn't say where. No one updated the family address book. The girls stopped asking questions, and Heather stopped offering answers. The holiday cards eventually stopped too, replaced by one short email to Maya the following spring. "He's okay, still angry, but that's his to carry now. Thank you for doing right by your mother. H." There were no hard feelings, just distance and peace. On the morning of Maya's graduation, the sky was clear. No wind, no nerves, just ceremony. She wore her gown like armor, her cap pinned tight. In her hand was a single folded sheet, yellowed at the edges, Ruth's handwriting soft and looping. It wasn't the will, it wasn't the letter. It was the cornbread recipe. The one from the old cookbook, with a note scribbled next to the ingredients. "Don't overmix. Let it rest. It rises better that way." Maya smiled. Later that day, she'd tuck it back into the cookbook on Ruth's old shelf. But for now, it stayed in her hand. Proof that some legacies weren't legal. They were baked in. After the ceremony, Maya stood by herself for a moment behind the building, near a cluster of trees and a low stone wall. She looked out over the lawn where people gathered in loose knots, hugging, laughing, posing for pictures. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't need a picture to prove it happened. Instead, she whispered into the open air just once. "Thank you. At my birthday, my son said, 'You're just a bill we regret.' So I gifted him a lifetime without a cent and left wealth where it belonged."